welcome back to the Old Fashioned On Purpose podcast. So, here in the podcast, we've talked a lot about nature over the years and our connection to nature and kind of how we fit into the natural world as humans. But more often than not, for obvious reasons, we talk about that through the lens of agriculture and regenerative farming and cultivating the land on our little homesteads. But as I learn more about this and my understanding broadens, I'm really starting to understand that that's just the beginning. And you could absolutely argue that there is a connection to nature that we have as humans that goes much deeper and is much more ancient than even the connection that we find in a garden. And that is kind of that wild connection that we have to the land and to animals. And so I would venture to say, I don't think I've ever talked about fishing here on the podcast, but I'm excited to talk about it today. And I have with me Conor Sullivan, and he's probably one of the best people we could have on to talk about this topic. He's an author, he's an angler, he's fished all over the place. He lives in Alaska with his family. And Conor, you have a pretty impressive resume, if you will. So I'm going to let you give us a little bit of an introduction.
Sure. And thank you for having me on, Jill. This is a real privilege to be here talking to you today. My name is Conor Sullivan. I live here in Southeast Alaska with my wife, Renee, and our three beautiful children. I kind of grew up, since, my first memory was of fishing, put it that way. I grew up, I think my rod in my hand here, and I've fished across our entire country. My dad was also in the Coast Guard. And so we move for every 3 or so years, and as the name implies, the Coast Guard means you're on the water. And so I got to live in some just remarkable places growing up, from New England to Hawaii, and everywhere in between. And in between my passion for fishing, and I also move around, as I started experiencing a lot of really diverse and remote fishing areas at a young age. It was time to go to college. I went to the Coast Guard Academy, and I actually got a degree in marine science, and got another master's in marine affairs from Rhode Island, and a 200-ton mariner's license. And in high school, I was working on a lobster boat part-time, and kind of everything I do seems to be revolving around fish or fishing, and it kind of drives most of my life decisions. And as as luck would have it, is my mom was a writer. She's a writer, so you take a sailor and a writer, and really once we started building our families, I had as a home mower, and I kind of put down my fishing rod and picked up a pen and started kind of writing some of my stories down of adventures I've had, and so I'm proud to kind of add author to something I've become here recently. And I recently actually published a book called Fishing the Wild Waters, which kind of covers my three kind of favorite areas of fish in the world, which is Alaska, Hawaii, and New England. It's kind of part how-to and part fishing philosophy of kind of, it teaches the technical and maybe transcends it a little bit. So in a nutshell, that's me.
Awesome. Yeah, fantastic. And, I initially came across your work. You had sent in an application to be on the podcast. And in case nobody knows this, probably nobody actually does know this, I have a form on my website that you can apply to be on as a guest, and you filled it out. And I was really impressed with your bio and what you wrote, because I could tell that you were approaching this from a little bit of a deeper angle, which is totally my jam. And one of the things that you mentioned in your bio is that you like to invite readers to traverse America and turn down the noise of modern living, which is totally I love that. And tune into their fundamental relationship with the sea. And that really caught my attention. Obviously, I'm not an ocean girl. I don't spend a lot of time on water. Wyoming is incredibly dry. But whenever I have visited the ocean or large bodies of water, I feel something. I feel a stirring. And I've always kind of wondered about that. And I also, oddly enough, feel a similar stirring here on the grasslands. And I know that grass and water are two different things, but there's got to be some similarity there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about what is our fundamental relationship with the sea as a human.
Yeah, and I think there absolutely is a relation between the grasslands and the ocean, because there's a connection to the world beyond one that humans created, and that the ocean to me is a frontier. Is once you get away from the beach and just a little bit offshore, is the shoreline literally fades away, and you're kind of off on your own there. And I will say I feel more alone in a big city than I do 20 miles offshore by myself.
Yeah.
And, in America, we have this, our exclusive economic zone. We have millions of square miles of water, ocean beyond our shores. And to me, it's a place I go for subsistence and solace, and it kind of feeds the soul and it feeds the body. And I've worked on it professionally, and when I'm not on water on professional capacity is I go back on water and just myself to kind of rejuvenate myself. And it's a wild it's a wild waters, it's a wild area, and I've no doubt that the grasslands of Wyoming have the same feeling of you kind of feel like you belong there, and you start to get in touch with the weather and the tides and the animals, and you're not on the clock, based on our own 24 hours, but really it's kind of based on that cycle of nature, and it feels right. It feels at home, and that's I try to spend as much of my time out there as I can.
Yeah, I love that. How would you? This might be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it. How would you define wild waters versus not wild waters, or how does that all work out?
Yeah, so I mean, I know living in Alaska, you're kind of spoiled because this is truly some wild waters up here. There's just even here in the capital city of Juneau, like the road just ends. There's no more you can drive, and we live in the Tongass National Forest. And I'm confident saying that most of the fish I catch here have never seen a hook before. So it's truly a real blessing to live here and just have that exposure and have my kids see wild animals, bears, and we live near a glacier. Like just that level of wildness still exists in this country. But you don't need to live in Alaska or Hawaii to have that. I said living in high school for a couple of years outside Cleveland, Ohio. Like I've had just like magical mornings on the river there, watching these steelhead trout come up, and it looked like Alaska. There's hundreds of them at a time, all migrating up to spawn. Obviously Wyoming, there's a ton of wild water, so it's not necessarily like a geographic thing as much as it's kind of like within yourself of getting out to your own quiet places in the world, and that can be mean different places, different things to different people in different places. But I imagine that in everyone's town and definitely everyone's state, there's some quiet sections and quiet places you can feel pretty wild out there.
Yeah, I like the definition, or how you term that, the quiet places. I think that's the key, and maybe that's the similarities that I feel with the prairie, is just that the vastness and the fact that humans haven't been able to tame it yet. I think that's what I like the most about it. And then the ocean definitely falls into that category. Hey friends, I'm just interrupting this episode for a second to give a shout out to our other sponsor, the Modern Homesteading Conference. So this is really exciting because up until now, all the big homestead conferences and events mostly happened on the East Coast. And that meant if you live out west, then you're either driving a long ways, you're flying a long ways, and that just makes things a lot more complicated when you have animals and gardens and all the things as we do. However, that is changing this year. So the Modern Homesteading Conference is a brand new event. It's going to be held in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It's live and it's 2 full days filled with your favorite homesteading experts like Joel Salatin, Homesteading Family, Melissa K. Norris, Anna of All Trades, Farmstead Meatsmith, and many, many more. I was looking at their website and it's a great lineup of speakers. So not only are you going to get all that valuable knowledge and the skill sets that are going to help you be more self-sufficient no matter where you live, but you also get the bonus opportunity to enjoy a concert by Grammy award-winning farmer and filmmaker Rory Feek. I love Rory. He's been on my podcast. He visits our homestead every year. He's a dear friend. So that's a big treat. All the homestead knowledge by day and a concert with Rory at night. So classes will include raising a family milk cow, on-site live butchering and curing demos, like that's pretty darn cool, homestead income classes, 4-season gardening, cheese making, homeschooling, sustainable agriculture, and tons more. So don't miss out. Tickets are on sale now. Head on over to their website to see all that is included in the event and to save your ticket. The website is modernhomesteading.com. And now back to our episode.
Oh no, so no, 100%. And so the ocean is a place that it really is untamable, and it's to go out any time on your own is always a little bit of a heist, and especially up in Alaska where uh, the weather turns on a dime here, and it's just such a magical place to get out. And when you're, for me, it kind of motivates me to be in places I wouldn't normally go. Like 2 years ago, I was out fishing here with my younger brother, and it was like a sunrise, and we were casting for salmon, and we hear like this loud exhale. And it's kind of imagine like the eagles flying overhead, and the sun's fighting with the clouds for who's gonna have the day. And we look out the channel, it's this pod of orcas, killer whales coming up. And like that I've never would have seen that if it wasn't for fishing. It kind of, it places me into the wild world, to experience things that I think that I would have never had the opportunity to see. And I think that's what's really special to me.
Yeah, that is special. Okay, so to kind of shift a little bit over into the practical side, because I know, my audience, we love food. We love growing our own food. We love procuring our own food. And a lot of that's cultivated by our own hands. But there's a whole world of wild crafting and wild game and fishing out there that I feel like, at least I'm speaking for myself, I could explore a lot more thoroughly. So can you kind of give my audience and myself a baseline, like for someone starting out, why is it worth it to take the time to get your own seafood?
Yeah, and that's kind of the fundamental question, I think, to a lot of things is whether it's beef or it's fish. Like, we can get all this stuff at a store. We can go in any supermarket and we can buy fish and we can buy beef, and you come and cook it, and that's kind of part of life. And I think what message I'd really appreciate that you really push, Joe, is kind of doing it yourself, and taking that harder road. And for me, kind of one big mantra I was going to work with is that food should end in plastic but not begin there. And to me, it's really important to know where my food comes from. I know you feel the same way.
Yes.
But to have actually seen it, to held it, I was joking around my kids. I'm like, you're mostly made of like elk and salmon, because most of our meals during the week are we kind of go between like fish and wild meat, and we'll throw in some chicken there once in a while. I haven't figured out yet how to grow chickens here with the black bears. It's kind of a challenge.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like chumming.
Yeah.
Like that scene from Jurassic Park also.
Yes.
But I guess to answer your question is there's a health component, there's a cost component, and I think most important for me is like a fulfillment. And health wise is so you're able to grow grass fed, grass finished beef, and actually see those cows. And I think that's really important to actually like to know your food, to have held your food, because that's we are what we eat, and it's important to have set up that proper food, and eating local is not just like a fun catchy term. It's like, no, actually I know where my food comes from, and especially for someone who's tries to eat healthy and provide healthy food to kids, is you're chasing around like the organic food, and that's expensive, and there's grass fed and there's grass finished and free range, and instead, unless you're like yourself on a homestead where you actually can do that stuff, but you're kind of taking people's word for it, and also paying a lot of money to replicate what occurs in nature. And for me, it's like, why don't you just go to nature in the first place and get it? Eating fish it's about the last wild capture protein in the world. Market hunting was banned over 100 years ago, so if you want to eat deer, elk, you got to go get it yourself. But we still eat wild seafood, and that's actually really cool. We haven't really figured out a way to really, on a huge scale, is to mimic what nature does. So for a place like Alaska, like eating wild salmon, like that is the purest protein in the world. Like it is, there's no concerns about any real contaminants in it. You know where it comes from, and you held in your own two hands before it went into your freezer, and that's important for me. And the cost, I was down in Pike's Place Market in Seattle a couple weeks ago, and it was like $40 a pound for salmon. It was Alaska salmon, and it's kind of a cool point of pride to feel like you start doing math in your head, and you never do it for financial reasons, but like, wow, what we have here at our fingertips is obviously very desirable for the rest of the country. And eating Alaska salmon is, it's pretty high end for the rest of the world, and for us, it's like Tuesday night.
Yeah.
And then fulfillment, and that's really for me. It closes that circuit of your ancestral connection for a little bit, and it's like, why bother doing that in your own time? But it's like, what else would you rather do? Like, for
Right.
whether I was out on a 7-day elk hunt this past fall, and you get to experience these moments, and so they place you in the wild, and there's a fear component, and we've spent millenniums trying to pave the world and tame it, and to go out there and like seek that out, I think is it's kind of counterculture to most of what humanity has done. But I just like, there's a part of my brain that like comes alive when you're reeling in a fish or pulling up a crab trap or packing out a deer, that like, this is kind of what I was meant to do. And
Yes.
And I noticed that I never, if ever like leftovers as a kid, like you'd scrape it, into the trash. Like I just don't do that with wild food. Like there's a respect issue there. You harvested this animal, you took its life, and like you owe it to like eat every last scrap. And it just, like I said, really connects, the mind, body, and soul for me. And it's nothing to get like too far over on. And I'll eat store-bought chicken and go out for a nice dinner. My wife. I got date night come up this weekend. But it's something I always kind of strive to do, and I think I'm better off for it.
Yeah, well said. So many pieces to unpack there. I like what you said about your brain lighting up. I don't know if you've read Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter, if you're familiar with his work.
Yes,
yeah,
awesome book.
So I got the picture of his one of his scenes of his book when you were talking, and he's talking about, if anyone's interested, the science behind your brain actually does light up. Like we're supposed to be in those situations. We're supposed to be bored. We're supposed to be uncomfortable. We're supposed to be cold. We're supposed to be physically, for lack of a better word, stressing out our bodies with manual labor and manual work. But it's pretty cool when we get back in those ancestral connections. I think it's fascinating, and we're so disconnected. We don't even realize what we're missing in our modern world. I also love what you said that, what else would you rather be doing? And I want to ask that a lot. And sometimes I don't, because I like to people around me, because I'm like trying not to be snarky, but they're like, oh, I would never grow my own beef, or I'd never grow a garden, or I'd never bake the bread because it takes so much time. And I'm like, but what are you saving time for? Like more Netflix, more phone scrolling? Like really though, what are you saving time for? And I know there's legitimate answers to that, but really, I think it's a good question to ask. What are you saving time for?
Like my mother-in-law has this thing. She's like you have a different smile when you're holding a fish, and like, it's like true. Like if I'm like, like that, you catch a big salmon or a tuna, like there's an extra like level of smile I have. So I'm just like so happy, and I'm happy for like days afterwards. Like I'm walking, I spent my weekend like being like cold and wet and sleep deprived, and I come in to work on Monday, like, and I'm like lit up. I'm like physically like more excited to be there. And it just like it kind of illuminates a part of the human mind that I think is often overlooked, and it's that connection, at least for me, back to nature and back to a little part of the wild for just a moment even.
Yeah, and I think it's it's good to consider for people listening. Like at least for me, I've kind of always thought, well, first you do the farming, homesteading, and then like level 2 is the hunting and the fishing. But actually, your point is people, not everyone can have a homestead, not everyone can have 60 acres, not everyone can raise their own beef or pork or chicken. So maybe instead you hone your skills with hunting and fishing, you get your licenses, you figure out how to do it, and you could be filling your freezers and feeding your family without having the farmed animals, and you're still getting amazing meat, high quality, it's good for you, and you're making your brain happy at the same time.
Yeah, but I have a garden in the backyard that I'm really excited about getting rolling here in a couple of weeks once the frost. So yeah, you can kind of, I think where you live, you have to kind of adjust to, how much land access do you have, and could you have a small head of cattle, or is it, to go out and get your own wild meat, or is it really focused on gardening? A lot of it's situational, but all those are are, should be, kind of in that Rolodex of, of what you want to do to hopefully collect your own food.
Absolutely. Do you have any information on the nutritional differences between a farmed fish and a wild caught fish? I know, I mean, obviously with beef, there's differences, grass finished versus feedlot finished, but I'm assuming that translates over into the fish world as well.
Yeah, there is, and I think if people look on some internet research, there's some pretty good studies, and I'll make sure I get that science right. But like my biggest takeaway, my biggest lesson was that I used to not like the taste of salmon. Like growing up, you'd have it once in a while, and I was like, I just didn't like it. And then I came up to Alaska when I was 19, and we were catching these wild sockeye and Chinook salmon. And I realized I just didn't like the taste of farm salmon. Like I never had wild salmon. And once I had this, like, this is a completely different fish. It is like you're comparing two different species. One was raised to expedite it with speed and increasing its ability to grow as fast as it can, as fast as possible. And one was a wild animal roaming the ocean for its entire life till it met my hook. So yeah, there's obviously plenty of scientific studies there. I think that all lead you to say that a wild fish is more healthier for you. There's no need for pesticides, antifungals. You are what you eat. So if you're feeding fish a commercial fish food, it's gonna be whatever it's made out of. So eat wild fish is my takeaway.
Yeah. So in your experience, is the farmed, like salmon, for example, is it stronger tasting? Does it have like the fishier taste? Like why didn't you like that as compared to the wild?
It was like I said, I haven't had in so long now. I've kind of like forgotten about exactly the new one. It was like a softer, mushier taste, and it was I don't know, it just didn't taste to me good. Like I never enjoyed it. Wild salmon it's robust, it's oily, it's a ton of omega-3s in it. And you eat it, like you don't feel gross afterwards. And sometimes you had a meal and like, it doesn't sit right. Like you don't feel that way eating like a piece of deer or a piece of salmon. Like you feel like good afterwards.
Yeah.
And you feel good. I can remember my mother-in-law coming up to Alaska when we were living in Kodiak and looking at Renee and I'm like, you guys look really healthy. And it was just because we were like just eating wild foods. We ate salmon like 4 days a night or four meals a week. Sorry.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I can that reminds me a lot of just the difference with the different types of beef, just more robust and more, for lack of a better word, beefier. It's more true to its natural form when it's fed what it was. Yeah.
Like I'm imagine you could tell it just like, like a grass-fed cow that you're raising versus a, more of an industrial raised cow. Like I'm sure someone like yourself could be like, oh yeah, these are two different animals, I guess. They're made of different things, so they taste different.
Totally. What fish are you most interested in, especially obviously for eating? What's your favorites that you really seek out?
The ones I'm catching, the ones that
okay.
I'll get just as excited about like catching like a small bluegill as like a giant marlin. But here in Alaska, like it's very cool because it's all very seasonal. Like a salmon run will last 6 weeks. So the first ones to arrive are the Chinook or the kings, and these are the biggest ones. They're the most elusive. They can get up to 100 pounds, or generally anything close to 40 or 50 pounds these days is really big. And so obviously, catching the biggest fish, and they have the highest oil count, so they're like really flavorful, like, and it's kind of just like the quintessential, iconic fish of Alaska. So those are coming up in June, and like myself, my buddies are already talking about our plans, and we're getting our boats ready, and the anticipation sometimes is just as exciting as catching himself. But yeah, the kings are really exciting, and then halibut up here, which is essentially people don't know they are just a giant flounder. My biggest was about 220 pounds, but they get up double that size, and they're fun to catch. They're pretty simple. It's kind of like it's more just a patience thing, waiting there on your boat, and I really enjoy watching my young kids now duke it out with even a 20-pound halibut. Is they're just like going
Yeah.
back and forth on this thing, and then we bring that fish home, and they get to enjoy a fish they caught, and that's seeing the whole feedback loop of I provided for the family even as a 6-year-old. Like there's a connection. I can see that that connection being made, and it's like it's a proud moment for me, and especially now is watching my kids catch fish are generally my favorite fish to catch, because it's I've caught 600-pound marlin in Hawaii and big tuna in New England, but last year watching my son said catch a nice king salmon, that was my best fish of the year, because
Yeah.
You're teaching that, and you're seeing that your kids enjoying what you enjoy, and it's just a proud moment as parents to see your kids succeeding.
Yeah, that feedback loop is everything. I've noticed with kids, fishing or farming or homesteading or whatever. People often ask me, well, how do I get my kids excited about it? I'm like, we got to get them out there doing it and get them getting those little hits of dopamine for lack of a better word. They got to see that success. They got to fail and they got to succeed. And you don't have to force it. You don't have to motivate them. It just does it itself. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, like we have one little maple tree in our front yard. Like it's got to be this big. It's the only maple tree I've seen in Alaska. And so we went out there this week, and we drilled a hole, and I actually tapped it.
Cool.
And I took like a metal straw, like a drinking straw, and it's going into like a half-gallon glass milk container, and it's like duct tape, and
yep.
But I had my kids doing everything with me. They're drilling holes. They're putting on now we go out there and check it every morning, and it's that same thing as that dopamine hit of oh, we're doing something. We're making food out of a tree, and they come from school, they check that, hey, only a little bit of syrup today, Dad, or a little bit of sap today, and it's those small things that kind of, I think, teaching your kids where your food comes from. It's a good life lesson, no matter what they choose to do in the future, of understanding how to, provide for themselves on some level.
Yes. Even if that's what I say, even if my kids move away and they never homestead as adults, they'll have these lessons as a foundation, and that's valuable. Yeah. So I know there's a million ways to cook fish, but what are your because I don't really know much about cooking fish. I can do a fillet sort of kind of if I have to. What are some pro tips for just cooking fish on a basic level? But I know you figured some stuff out over the years, so spill your secrets if you will.
Obviously, it depends on what fish you're cooking. But you can't go wrong on the grill. I think anything over open flame is going to be pretty good. So if you had a grill and you had a cast iron skillet, I think between those two things, like 90% of what you want to cook can be done there. Actually, really enjoy eating raw fish, particularly tuna. So your pelagics. We lived in Hawaii for 4 years, and my kids grew up they just ate poke. It's called small cubes of tuna. They would just gobble that down. I think it's probably still their favorite food to this day.
Oh, that's awesome.
The key to that, though, is obviously food sanitation. So I take that really seriously. Any fishing I'm doing is, no one cares more about your food sanitation than yourself. And hunters are really good about that too, of butchering the process and knowing, changing your knives out and keeping that clean. So I always have to be aware of keeping that fish, very clean and sanitary. But as far as cooking is one thing. For anything that tastes good is you have to take care of it. And even in Alaska, between May and October, in the back of my 400s, I'm gonna have a cooler of ice. So every fish goes into ice, because you got to keep that temperature low. Every time I catch fish, I bleed it out. And same thing, for people who don't fish, it's seems kind of primal. You're clubbing, you're bleeding them, and oh, this is pretty aggressive. But it goes back to that respecting that fish. If you're gonna kill a fish, you really got to take care of it. So you bleed it out, and I'll generally gut it to get all that potential for bacteria to grow. And I'm not a big fan of fresh fish. Now it kind of catch people off guard, but fresh. It's I don't think you'd ever butcher a cow and eat it that night. It would probably, be very chewy. So same thing with fish. I noticed this in Hawaii. If I caught a tuna or mahi and I try to cook it that night, or actually ate it raw, it didn't taste as good if I gave it a couple of days. And you gotta let it go through rigor mortis. And so with fish, if I can, I'll let them sit in the ice overnight and go through rigor mortis, and they're you've ever seen like a fish, they're like curled up like a C.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That means they're not ready to get cut yet. And like, people like bend them flat to cut them up, and you're just like ripping the muscle for that. So let them go, go through rigor mortis, and when they're back to being supple as, filleted, or if it's trout, you can just cut the head off. And then, yeah, for me, pan searing or on the grill, the less ingredients, sometimes the better. Olive oil, some salt, some butter, and then just don't overcook it. Like get to right where it's getting close, and then like take it off, and it'll cook that last little bit on its own. But once you overcook a fish, it's pretty noticeable sometimes. You kind of you burnt it too much. So that's the quick tips.
Okay, that's good. It's good to know. And I mean, it makes sense, but I never thought about it letting the meat sit for a few days. Like we do that with the chickens we butcher. If you eat them that day, they're rubbery, so we let them sit nice overnight, and then we put them in the freezer or whatever after that. So that makes total sense. But I hadn't thought of it in the fish realm, I guess.
Yeah, it's not something I didn't even discover this until later in my adulthood. But it was like generally when if I caught a salmon, there's like you hear like it could be light out till midnight in June. So you get home and you're like, I'm too tired to cut this fish up. I'll just leave them on ice overnight. And like, so I realized like those fish were tasting better than the fish I cut up and put on the grill. And like, those edges of the fillet would like curl up, and it was good. I mean, it wasn't like it was off-putting, but like it wasn't as good as it could have been because you hadn't given it time to go through that, that process of rigor mortis.
Yeah.
And then it gets really good.
Yeah, letting all those fibers relax. Interesting. Okay. And it sounds like a steak in terms of like, if you have a good, if you have a good beef steak, you don't want to put a bunch of like A1 sauce and rubs on it. Just like a little salt, a little butter, leave it alone. So it sounds like good fish fillet is in those same lines.
Yeah. If you put all that time to get this really, impressive protein, let's say whether it's beef or trout, like it should be able to speak for itself. And if it can't, like, you may have some problems further down, upstream that's causing you to have to put a ton of A1 on it, or like covered in ranch dressing, or whatever people do.
Ketchup.
Kind of like mask the taste, and like fish should never taste fishy. Like if it tastes like it tastes fishy, like something's up with it, and there's probably in the handling process, it may have been left in the sun or not properly bled or gutted, that the bacteria got a hold of that. But if it's really off-putting, like it's not the species' fault. It's probably the angler.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense. So obviously I don't live in Alaska, and I think most of my audience also does not live in Alaska. So how do people like me, also I live in Wyoming, which is like the driest state in the union. Maybe not, but I say that because it sounds good. It feels like the driest state in the union. How does someone like me get to fish in the wild waters, or is that just something I have to watch from afar?
Nope, there are plenty of wild waters in Wyoming. Actually, Wyoming's the only state that has less people than Alaska, so we actually have something in common there.
We do have less people than you guys? I thought you would have.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, interesting. So
you guys have taken the lead.
We're taking the lead on that, or the bottom, however you want to think of it. Yeah.
So, which is where I like to be on those least populated places in the world.
Yes.
Yeah, there are so much wild waters in Wyoming, and there's Flaming Gorge Reservoir, which leads out to the Green River, and some really great fishing. But for someone who's never, I grew up, so like my, the mold was cast the second I was born. Like I was fishing from day one. So if you don't have that kind of, familiar, you can grow up in it, like that's okay. I didn't, for comparison, I didn't start hunting until I turned 30, and now it drives most of my fall decisions. So like, I'm not just like saying hypotheticals, like you can catch up. Like obviously, people who started doing it have, a great baseline. But for fishing is, first thing you've never done it is just focus on one fish. So, the internet's great, but like there's like overwhelming. There's trout fishing, bass fishing, and Alaska and Hawaii, and like just focus on one thing. So in Wyoming, it might just be trout. Like, all right, let's go trout fishing. And then I tell you is go to your local tackle store. And, it's like my favorite places to go. Anywhere I go, it's like, I'll find a tackle store. It might be a cool fly shop. It might be a old mom and pop fishing store here in Alaska. But go in there and just be honest, like, hey, I'm I'm an adult and I want to learn how to do this. And could you help me get me started? And unlike a big box store, like, they're a small fishing store, like it stays in business because it has good recommendations and helps people out. So just, being honest and telling people your interest, like, goes a long way. And then just get like medium price gear. Like, you want like the fishing version of like the 1999 Toyota Corolla. Like, you don't need to get like
Okay.
this like crazy high end stuff. Like, just something like good, like good enough. There's plenty of time to go buy all that fancy stuff. But like the longer I fish, like I've actually kind of like shifted back towards like going simple. The difference between high end and medium stuff is not that, in terms of like quality, is not huge, but like there's a huge price difference. So
Mm.
just get like the medium price stuff, get a good recommendation, and just like go for one fish. And just, you can learn about it online, and you can do. Each state has like a fishing game, and they want you to, be successful. So, do some homework, do some scouting, and then for me, no matter what fishing I'm doing, like, go early. Like, uh, fish are generally crepuscular, which means they're more active at dawn and dusk. So like if I'm going fishing, like I'm going to be out there at sunrise, and it one, like, gets you out of bed early, and like you get to enjoy the whole day. And it's just like a magical time. Like I'm sure you see that on the prairie, of like, just as the sun's coming up, is like the night shift's going to bed, and the day shift's coming on, and there's different animals going on, and the fish will be relaxed, they'll be close to shore, and they haven't been, run over by boats or people fishing for them. So go early, and with the right recommendations, is you'll kind of build that knowledge base of this one fish, and you can go to the next one, and then hopefully one day you're coming to Alaska.
Yeah, totally. I like your encouragement that you can start anytime, because I think for a lot of people in a lot of things, and I think fishing would fall into this category. There's that belief that if you don't start when you're a kid, then it's kind of too late. And I think a lot of adults are embarrassed to start things or learn new skills when they get older, because it's not fun to be the beginner always, right? None of us love being the clueless newbie. So I think it's
Yeah,
encouraging. I like that you didn't start hunting until you were 30. I think it gives people a lot of hope. And that that tip of just like be honest, I think that applies to so many things. I see that in the horse world a lot. I'm like, if you don't know how to ride a horse, just say so, please. Don't act like you are John Wayne and then you get bucked off, and then it's
yeah,
like, you get hurt and it's embarrassing. So it goes a long way. I think that humility and finding those good mentors helps a lot.
yeah. And I mean, I love taking people fishing. Like I'm really interested in this. Like, could I go with you? And if someone's like wanting to get up at like 4 in the morning, I'm like, yeah, like absolutely. Like, because the same, I really enjoy watching people, be successful and catch fish, and like, see, their connections to nature, kind of take root. So don't be embarrassed, and go up to, and especially like in a small tackle store, like I'll meet like, um, people who are good fishermen, and like you make friends, just kind of straight conversation, and it goes a long way. And if you have like young kids, like, absolutely bring your kids with you, and like let's make this fun, and something that we can enjoy to do. And one thing I started doing recently, since having kids, is like I'll go fishing sometimes to catch fish, and I'll go fishing sometimes to catch fishermen. And I try to like
Mm,
bifurcate those two, because like there's times you got to go out and like, hey, we're gonna fill the freezer. Like we're doing like an 18-hour trip, and like we're gonna come back like dog tired. But like, that's like, I caught all my halibut last year pretty much on one trip, and we just, dawn to dusk, like it was a full day. And there's days I want to just like teach my kids, and I think sometimes if you try to combine those two, and you see people get frustrated with kids, or you lose a big fish at the boat, and you're like, losing your temper. That's not, you're not winning, fishermen there, and you're also you're not having a good time. Kids are having a good time. So kind of like know which one you're going for, and if I can go catch fishermen, and we catch a fish in the process, like that's a win for me.
yeah, I love that. That's good perspective. I think that can apply to a lot of things, especially with kids, because it's so easy. At
Yeah.
least it was chores around the house, homestead stuff. I'm like, oh, I just want to get this done. And then you have to remember you're cultivating the kid, not just the garden or the animals. So good reminder. Um, One topic I think that comes up for people sometimes, and I've actually watched a number, and I say this with hesitation, because I know you take these with a grain of salt, but like Netflix documentaries, which take with a grain of salt, on overfishing or, the decreasing numbers of fish in the ocean. And I recognize that what the type of fishing you're doing is very different than like mass commercial fishing. But like, if someone's concerned about that, we are encouraging more people to get out to the wild waters and fish, and they're worried about overfishing or the conservation piece, what would you say to that?
Yeah, one, I'd appreciate that they're looking into it, because I think, the more we collectively as a nation look into, the management of our remaining wild areas, like the better we are for it. I would say that the U.S. fisheries are the best managed fisheries in the world. If a stock is overfished, they're taking steps, and this is the National Marine Fisheries Service or the state, if it's a state fishery, they're taking steps to rebuild that stock. And if it's overfished, you're not going to be able to catch. It'll be illegal to catch that fish. With have very very strict limits. If it's not, the bag limits, the krill limits will reflect that, hey, this fish is able to be targeted. So if you're able to catch that fish, there's a reason for it. The managers, the fishery scientists said they're really impressive, and I enjoy being around those people, because they're fishermen too, and they go out and enjoy the resource. But I can't think of any fish in the country that are in a bad spot, but it's open season on catch the last one. So so that's good. I think you should always be mindful of what you're taking, and also, like, if just because you can keep 10 of them, like, make sure you're going to use 10 of them. Some fish like trout, like, don't freeze that well. So just take a few for the next couple meals, because there's nothing more disrespect than catching fish and not using them. They end up in a bucket in the sun, and then end up in the back of a freezer burnt, and that's kind of the last to see of them. So only take the need. Catch and release is really really important, but don't feel bad if the fish is able, the stock is healthy, and you can look into that through all the online, but there's plenty of resources for people who want to see the status of fisheries, but generally is the regulations will reflect how that stock is doing. But overall, stocks are doing great, and if they're not, there's a plan to rebuild them.
Very cool.
Okay.
All right. So my one final question for you is kind of circles back full circle to the application that you sent in. And I love that you wrote this line in there. You said the cultural and fishing outposts of New England, Hawaii, and Alaska continually draw me back, as if trying to tell me something, if I would just be quiet and listen. So I'm curious, what do you think they're trying to tell you?
It's those two places in particular. The culture and the ocean and the fisheries are so intertwined, and it's to me it's just that kind of culmination of mind, body, spirit, that you're going out there and you're catching fish, and not just to feed you, but also kind of feed your soul. And as far as what they're trying to tell me is, I think it tells me that I'm doing the right thing. Is that when you're out there and you're I'm watching sunrise come up around the ocean, and hopefully catch a few fish for dinner, and you come back early, and your kids come out and open up the cooler and see these fish, and there's just a sense of pride to that. It just kind of like, it's like, I think the reason why I was put on earth, God created me to teach others how to fish and to go fishing. And in Hawaiian culture is there's a term called pono, and it's kind of balance and harmony. And when I'm fishing just the right amount to feel reinvigorated and alive, and I feel like all my brain is firing. Like, I feel that balance, that harmony within my life, and I'm just really thankful I get the opportunity to live in these cool places and enjoy this grand endowment that we have in this country. And I think people don't sometimes realize that, like, I think the further west you get, in Wyoming and Montana and obviously Alaska, like, there's just some really wild areas, and they haven't been spoiled yet. And, people like yourself are, trying to cultivate the lands and, live with it, and, not live against it. And the ocean is an extension of that. It is, I think the last remaining frontier for us. And it's, you leave sight of land on a small boat, like, you are immediately focused. You're not daydreaming. Like, you're in the element. You're kind of on your own there. It's just your knowledge, and hopefully your boat is able to get you home, and you catch some fish in the process. But it makes you come alive, and I feel alive out there, and every trip out there is a small blessing. So I think the ocean is telling me that I'm right where I belong.
Wow. And that's a way to end an interview. Man, that's good. And I think we all have that thing that been put on earth for. And I think it's so different for the individual. And I love that you found yours. And I think just what you said, it makes you feel alive. I think that's how we know. So that's pretty awesome.
Well, I think you found yours too, Jill.
I did. Yeah, I did.
See what you've done, so.
And it's so fun that everyone's different. We all have the little niche that is for us. And mine's horses and homesteading. Yours is fishing and oceans. And it's pretty cool. I love it. It makes me excited. Yeah. Conor, this has been amazing. I feel suddenly excited about fish, which I could never have said that before. Where can folks connect with you online, and how can they get a copy of your book?
Yeah. So online, I'm at Sullivan Lures, like my last name, Sullivan. And then the book, it's available Amazon, Target, Walmart, Barnes and Nobles, hopefully your small bookstore as well. It's published by Pegasus Books. And hopefully, someone's interested in fishing and wants to get out there and explore the wild waters, finds it useful and invigorates them to get out there and explore the world beyond the ones that we created as humans.
So good. So guys, go check out Conor's stuff on Instagram. Go grab the book. And thank you so much for coming on. This was so good and practical, but also inspirational. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you for having me on. I really, really appreciate it as well.